You know, I don't know anyone, at least any sane person, that goes around and says that what the world needs more of is hate. I mean, honestly, do any of you know anybody who says that? In fact, I would argue that the vast majority of people, I mean, almost everybody, I don't care if you're on the right-hand side of the spectrum or the left-hand side of the spectrum, what everybody says is what the world needs more of is, absolutely. I mean, all of you agree with that, right? I mean, from anybody, so why can't we just get along as people? Why can't we just love one another? Because we say that if we just loved one another, if we just took care of one another, if we just had, you know, a sense of getting along and working together, the world would be a pretty good place. And Scripture actually agrees with you. St. Paul actually agrees with you. I mean, you saw that in our lesson from the book of Romans this morning, chapter 13. Paul is following up his teaching on how a Christian responds in government with, again, reaffirming the love that we are supposed to have as Christians. And he says, don't be in debt to anyone except having a debt of love. Now, what some people think that means is Paul is saying that, you know, hey, you know, a Christian should never borrow money. We should never be in debt and have to pay it back. And there may be some connotation on that, but not really, because the other thing you have to understand is the culture that Paul is writing into. And it's a culture that historians call an honor-shame culture. And what an honor-shame culture means is that if someone comes up to you and does something nice for you, if someone invites you to dinner, if someone pays you a kindness, if someone gives you a gift, then you are in debt to them. So if someone invites you to dinner, guess what you're expected to do later? Invite them to dinner. If someone gives you a gift, what are you expected to give to them? If someone does you a kindness, guess what you're expected to do to them? So whenever someone does something to you or for you, you are literally considered to be in debt to them. And Paul says, don't be in debt to anyone. And what he's saying is basically this, you know, a Christian should be so full of compassion, so full of love, so full of hospitality, so full of kindness and generosity that he or she never finds themselves in debt to anyone. You're already out there showing kindness, compassion, caring, love, honor, and so on and so forth to the extent that everyone owes you. And you owe no one anything because you are so full of compassion, grace, the love of God. And that love that you are showing, you show because you believe you are in debt to God for His mercy and His love. So Paul says, owe no one anything except a debt of love because we are in debt to God for His love. And then he lays it out. And he says, because when you love, you fulfill the law. You fulfill all of God's law when you love. So if you truly love, you will not commit adultery, you will not steal, you will not murder, you will not covet. Because you love your spouse so much, you will not look at anyone else or desire anyone else. Because you love what God has given you as a gift, you won't want what your neighbor wants. Because you love your neighbor, you will not kill him. And Paul wraps it up with the words, when you love your neighbor as yourself, you fulfill God's commands. So Paul says, all we need to do is love. Are you with me so far on that? I mean, did I get too deep? Or, I mean, everybody kind of understand what Paul is saying in the midst of all of this. And if we agree that Paul says this is what we need, and if we agree that society says this is what we need, and we agree that doesn't matter what part of the political spectrum you are on, we need love. The question that I'm wrestling with right now and thinking about is why don't we do it? I mean, honestly, look around society, look around culture, look at the world. Do we love in such a fashion? Yes or no? And I spent a lot of time thinking about this week, and I asked myself the question, not about the world and what, but I asked myself the question, why is it that I don't love in this way? Why is it that I can see this on paper? Why is it that I can preach it? Why is it that I can know that this is what God says, but I can't do it, and I don't do it? And I thought about that a lot, and I'm sorry if I get a little deep in this next few minutes, but I mean, I really is wrestling with this, and you know, I don't know if you wrestle with this or not, but if you don't, and you feel like you are loving, maybe you should be up here preaching instead of me. But I'm going to wrestle with this for the next few minutes, and maybe you'll find yourself having something in common with me, because I started thinking about this. You know, why is it that I can talk about loving, but then I don't do it? And I started going through all these examples in my head, and one of the first things I thought about was my kids. And I thought about my kids, and those of you who are parents, you probably will relate to this, because you know there are times when your kids do and say stuff that's just downright infuriating. It's just downright angering. You know, makes you just blow your stack. But I thought about that, and my kids do that, but I can't think of a time where I ever thought that I didn't love them, that I didn't even show them that love. I mean, sure, I discipline them and stuff like that, but I know the discipline is all out of love. It's not out of anger and what have you. So I thought about the fact that my kids do all this stuff that absolutely infuriates me, but then I continue to love them no matter what. And I thought, why is that the case? And I thought, you know what? Part of it has to do with the fact that I expect my kids to do that. I expect that they are going to push the boundaries. I expect that they're going to cross the boundaries. I expect they're going to do things that are crazy and disrespectful and so on and so forth. And because I expect that, I don't get overly upset to where I will withdraw my love from them. Do any of you relate to that? Can any of you kind of see that? I started thinking about that and okay, you know, that makes some sense to me. So what about my relationships with other adults, particularly the adults that are outside my family? You know, is there something in common there? And I started thinking, you know, well, when I get into a relationship with another person, I bring to that relationship certain expectations. I expect that I'm going to treat that person a certain way. I'm going to afford them respect until that respect is broken. I'm going to say that when I engage with this person, I believe that we can talk and respectfully, you know, visit with one another, even in certain sorts of disagreements. I expect that there's a certain level of decorum that we will bring to the table. So I expect that I will do that, and I also expect that this other person is going to do the same to me. I expect this other person is going to show respect to me, is going to share, be able to engage with me, and even in disagreements, we will be able to work through things. And of course, I always live up to my end of the bargain, right? If you don't know what sarcasm is, look that up. So I thought, oh, wait a minute here, okay. There are times when I bring expectations of myself, and I know I break them. And so I know that's a problem. And then I also know that I bring expectations to the table that I put on another person. And that person may not agree with those expectations. So if that other person does not live up to my expectations that I bring to the table, what am I likely to do? I'm likely to get angry and kind of break the relationship and keep that person at arm's bay and not love them. Because that's a lot easier to do that with someone who is not a family member than anything else. So I thought, oh goodness gracious, maybe that's at the heart of what is going on, is that I'm bringing these expectations, and these expectations are unfulfilled that I am placing on another person. And so then I started thinking some more, and I started thinking about society and societal level, and I started thinking, you know, do I bring expectations to the organizations and institutions that I am a part of? Yeah, I do. I mean, I have certain expectations of the church. I have certain expectations of school. I have expectations of the government. I have expectations of other organizations that I am a part of. And if these organizations and institutions don't meet my expectations, what do? I resign from them. I get angry with them. I try to change them. I try to go nuts with them sometimes. And a simple answer might be to say, well, then drop your expectations. Don't have any expectations whatsoever. But we can't do that, can we? I mean, I'm a Cowboys fan. And if Jerry Jones got up and decided to say, I'm just here for the money, and I'm going to put a really garbage product out there on the field. I'm going to give everybody minimum salaries and just play, rookies and stuff like that, and have a really horrible team because nobody has any expectations of it, and I'll just sit back and get all the fans' money and stuff like that. Does that make any sense to anyone in here? I mean, honestly, have I lost you already? Does that make sense to you? It might make sense if you're a Texans fan, but I know. Jerry is worth billions in money. Billions, he's worth billions. So, I mean, that makes no sense to drop expectations. We need to have expectations. But it seems to me that as I was looking at myself and I was looking at my involvement with all of these things, the expectations had an awful lot to do with me. They were my expectations. They were things that I thought the way other people should act. They were things the way that I thought other organizations and institutions should act. They were my thoughts of how I thought the government or schools should act. And that can be a bit of a problem, I think, in the long run as I thought about this, because it was like, wait a minute here. I think I can safely say that each and every one of us in here, deeply love our nation, right? Most of us deeply love being Americans and citizens of the U.S., right? Now, if I were to get up here and ask each and every one of you, I'd probably do it anonymously, what you thought was the best course of action for our nation, how many different answers do you think we would get? At whatever number of congregation members I ask. So I think you're right. We would get all of these different competing expectations of what we thought the nation should be. And if we were all dead set and believed that we were absolutely correct in our own assessment of things, what do you think is going to happen? Absolutely nothing. And not only, but maybe not absolutely nothing. There might be something that happens, but it may not be positive, would it? Because we might end up shouting at one another, so entrenched in our beliefs and expectations that we end up in open conflict rather than in reconciliation and love. Do you see the problem? Can you see what's going on in our greater nation? Can you see what oftentimes takes place in our organizations, in our institutions, in our schools, in our governments, and everything else like that? Oftentimes we bring these expectations. I bring these expectations to the table, and when they're not met, I get upset because my expectations aren't being made. And that's why I don't love like I should. Luther, during the Reformation, when he was writing, talked about sin. And he said sin is oftentimes a turning in on oneself, believing that we know what is right and wrong, believing that we are little gods ourselves, believing that our expectations are the expectations and rights that everybody should practice. And if everybody believes that, and if everybody is kind of turned in on themselves, one, you will not love. Number two, there will be constant conflict. And number three, we will never fulfill the demands and commands of Christ. And because I am turned in on myself, oftentimes I will end up in conflict. I will not love, and I will not fulfill the demands of Christ. And the answer to that, I think, The Christian answer to that is not that I have to try harder. It's not that I have to lower my expectations. It's not that I have to work to change those completely in my own frame of mind. The answer, according to Christianity, is to change my expectations for someone else's. And guess whose expectations I need to change mine too? Take a wild guess. Whose expectations do I need to set forth? God's. That's it. It's not necessarily my neighbor's expectations, because my neighbor could be just as turned in as I am. And so I don't look at my neighbor's expectations. I look at God's expectations and I say, what are God's expectations? And I look to Him. And I say, God, what do you expect out of me? What kind of God, what kind of expectations do you have? And I see that they are tremendously difficult. And I see that I don't follow them. And then I see what God does to help me. He takes on human flesh. He comes into the world as a man, Jesus Christ. He lives out God's expectation and law when I could not. And He takes my brokenness upon Himself. He takes my failure into Himself. And He dies for me on the cross. He loves me when I am unlovable. He loves me when I will not kowtow to His expectations and I expect Him to be what I want Him to be. He looks down from the cross at me when I refuse to let Him be the suffering Messiah, and He says, Father, forgive Kevin because he doesn't know what he's doing. He loves me with an unbelievable love. And then He says, I have prepared a place for you. And when I think about that and I think about what Jesus has done for me, I go, man, that's a love that is almost incomprehensible. That's a love that I almost can't understand. But if somebody shows me that kind of love, if Jesus is willing to show me that kind of love, what can I do for Him in return? What can I do to honor Him and what He has done in His death and resurrection? And Jesus says, if you love me, you'll follow my commandments. You'll love your neighbor. You will care for your neighbor. And so as I look at my life and I think, oh man, I'm not quite doing that, am I, Jesus? I'm not quite there yet, Jesus. I need you. I need you more and more. I need your grace more and more. I need your forgiveness more and more. Are you like me? Are you unable to love as you should love? Do you need a Savior too? Do you? Because if we do, I invite you to join me in rededicating our lives to the one who died for us, who loved us with a great love, so that our hearts can change together and we may truly love one another as He loved us, and we may fulfill His command. Amen.